In the previous lesson, we discussed page setup options. Well, print setup options tie in directly to your page setup, but the print setup options will be more tailored to the printer you're using to print your publications. So now we're going to look at, using our business card here, the various print options you have depending on the printer that you're using. So if you don't actually have this business card open, you can go to your Open button, or you can go to the File menu and choose Open from there. Navigate to the Lesson 2 folder of your exercise files and open up Business Card 2A right there on the list. So I've got it open already, and now I'm going to explore the print setup options. Now, don't go to your print button here on your standard toolbar. This is our quick print button, and that's simply going to use the defaults, so the default print options that are already set up, and send this publication to the printer. And that would again be your default printer. So instead, we're going to go up to File here, and we're going to click on Print Setup. This is different than Print. In the Print Setup dialog box, you can see things. Well, we've got two tabs at the top, Publication and Paper Settings, and then we've got our printer details as well. There's the printer that I'm using. I've got the HP DeskJet 3600 series lined up. If you've got multiple printers, you can click this drop down and select from the list. Now we can go into the properties of the printer like you could with any application, but we're going to concentrate here on our printing options. Now there's a whole section dedicated to printing much later on in this title, but right now I just want to go quickly through some of the options that tie into your page setup. For example, down here, you can see in the paper section we've got size is set to letter and portrait. What's really important is if you look over here at the preview that it's the exact same thing we saw when we were in the page setup options earlier. Here we've got a miniature representation of the entire sheet, which does contain 2 columns and 5 rows of business cards. Now the source you can see is set here to automatically select where the sheet is being fed from. And that's not a bad idea. Now if you're going to be doing these manually, you'll want to come here, click down here, and choose the actual tray. So if it's going from tray 1, you want to make sure that you select it. Now your printer may have different options than what you see from my print setup dialog box here. The orientation is defaulted to portrait. Here's where we change it to landscape, and you can see what happens if we do that. Things will fit a little bit differently, but again, you want to make sure that this lines up with the sheet of business cards that you've purchased. So make sure that you've got everything set up the way you need it before you print. Notice down here though, this is really cool. We don't always fill an entire sheet. Now if we're doing labels or business cards, maybe we've used some of the actual pieces here on our page. So if I've already printed a couple of business cards and now I'm missing these 2, I may want to start at the second row. And this is cool. So here I've got more print options. I'm going to start at the second row and look at my preview over here. So this row is being ignored. Now maybe there's something already there or they're ripped off, whatever. You can start at the next row. And maybe this guy right here is missing. Well, then you can start at the second column if you wanted to. And now you're only going to print these 4 and these 3 for a total of 7. We also have the ability to change the side and top margin, as well as the horizontal and vertical gaps. So the spaces in between the columns and the rows. And that's because of what we've selected here, multiple copies per sheet. Because of the template we're using, Publisher's smart enough to send this information to the printer. So under Print Setup is where you set up any of these options. Keep in mind as we go through the printing section later on in this title, we're going to come back to this stuff. It's going to look different depending on the template you're using and depending on the publication you're going to be sending to the printer. The other tab, the printer details up here, will show you some information about your printer, the type, where it's connected. Mine's connected by a USB cable. You can see some of the features that go along with this printer. Now if you've got a different printer selected here, your features and your printable regions and all of this information will be different from mine. Notice also we've got the properties button here for the specified printer, in this case my HP DeskJet. And if you're on a network, this is kind of handy. You can use the Find Printer button to go find other printers that are connected to your network. So for example, where I work, I've got a laser printer that I print to as the default, but when I want to print color copies, I use the Find Printer button to connect to a color LaserJet printer in the office. So I'm just going to click Cancel down here. And like I said, we're going to be returning to the print options dialog box much later on in this title, but that should give you an idea of how your page setup ties into your print setup.